Hello and welcome to the Indy Author Podcast. Today, my guest is Cynthia Gunderson. Hey, Cindy, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm good. I'm so excited to be here.
I am excited to have you here and to give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you. Cindy Gunderson is a voice actress and award-winning author who writes sci-fi, fantasy, contemporary romance, and women's fiction under the pen name Cynthia Gunderson. Cindy's first novel, Tier 1, was awarded first place in science fiction at the 2021 CIPPA EVVY Awards, and her women's fiction novel, Yes, and was honored with the Indy Author Awards first place prize for the state of Colorado in 2023. And so I need to send out a thank you to our mutual friend, Michael Laurent, who made a virtual introduction for us. So it's always fun to expand one's colleague network in that way. And so we are going to be talking today about audiobooks. And so, Cindy, I know you have lots of background in audiobooks. So just describe a little bit of what your experience has been, how you got into audiobooks, of what part they play in your author world.
Yeah, for sure. So I have always loved listening to audiobooks. I think they have become increasingly popular over the last few years. But even, 10 years ago, I was listening to radio shows and the beginnings of podcasts and all of those things. And so when audiobooks became more available, it was the best ever because I felt like I could be doing chores and, I had little babies and I could be listening and enjoying stories even when it didn't make sense for me to sit down and write. So I've always loved them, but I didn't ever consider doing them for a long time. I mean, I didn't consider writing for a long time. And it was really when I wrote my first series. You mentioned the Tier trilogy. That was the first series that I ever wrote. And when I wrote it, I immediately was like, well, I want to produce an audiobook for this because I love audiobooks. And then I looked at the price tag for what it would take to produce an audiobook. And that was way out of my budget at the time because I had just barely started writing and wasn't really making much on royalties. And the thing that kind of caught my attention was when I was looking at the, different auditions that you could do on Findaway Voices. It's now in audio, but it used to be Findaway Voices and ACX with Audible. I looked at the credentials of the actors and actresses and realized that I actually had just as many credentials because I grew up acting. So I did a lot of theater and I've done some voiceover work and commercial work here in the Denver area. Most of my theater work, I've done some community theater and stuff here, but just been performing most of my life. And so it kind of sparked that, like, wait a second, maybe this is something that I could do. And so then I went down the rabbit hole of just trying to figure out the whole audio engineering piece because I felt confident in my acting ability, but there's way more that goes on with recording an audiobook than acting. You have to even just the actual voice recording, like when I have done voiceover work, you're doing maybe a couple of sentences, maybe a paragraph. To be able to have the stamina to do an entire audiobook, have it be consistent, that takes a lot of practice and a lot of skill. So, and then obviously having the setup and the recording equipment and the know-how to master and to edit and be able to, post it. The first few audiobooks were rough. I will say that right now. It was a large learning curve and it was really difficult. And there were many moments where I thought about just giving up because I was so worried. There were two pieces of it. It was so much work. And then I was so worried that the product wasn't going to be good enough. And I would just get raked over the coals by audiobook listeners. People are pretty picky about their performances.
Yeah. So many questions out of that.
Okay, yes.
So one is that you said that when you looked at the criteria, you looked at the CVs of the people on places like at the time Findaway or ACX that you were finding that you were just as qualified. When you were looking at that, I mean, part of that is some of the other things you mentioned, like having the tech setup and things like that. But what criteria were you using when you were assessing whether or not you were as qualified or better qualified to narrate than
to actually do
there?
it?
Yeah.
Well, of course, there were some that I was finding that were just like insanely qualified, right? They'd done their, bachelor's and master's degree in performing arts and had all these accolades and had been performing forever. But those were kind of few and far between. I felt like most of the narrators that I was finding were kind of similar to me, where they had done training with, different mentors or different schools of thought. Maybe they had done a bachelor's, but maybe they had just kind of done classes here or there. They had like a resume of the work that they had done previously. And I feel like for acting, that's a lot of it is like, I've done these shows or I've worked with this director or I've performed in these various areas. And so I was seeing people that had done training, that had done some classes, that had performed in various capacities. And I was the same, you know? So I was like, okay, so I'm not like these people over here that have done 600 audiobooks and have been, on TV shows and film for the last 20 years. Like, I'm not that, but I'm definitely this. Like, I fit in with these actors and actresses that have been, just taking jobs and working toward these things, but maybe haven't like made it huge like some of these other audiobook narrators. So that's kind of where I fit. And I felt like, well, if they can do it, I can do it, right? And I love my work so much and I know these characters so well. It feels like with a little bit of work and practice, I should be able to bring this to life.
And it sounds as if your assessment was focusing mainly on their performance credentials or your performance credentials
Yeah.
as opposed to like how beautiful is their voice. So
Yes,
can you talk a
100%.
little bit about like to what extent does a beautiful voice matter?
Yeah, I think it absolutely matters. At the time, though, like I hadn't even gotten to the point where I was like, what voice would be good for my book? I was just looking into what the possibilities were, what the budget was. And so at the time, yeah, I actually didn't even listen to most of those people that I was looking at. I mean, I pressed play on a couple of, different samples or reels that they had. But for the most part, I was kind of just looking at like their written profiles. Now, if I were to look for an audiobook narrator, 100% I would be listening to just what they were capable of because I think or what their voice sounded like and, their inflection and their consistency and their reading and their pacing and everything like that. I have met so many people since I first started who, didn't have those credentials, who didn't have, the training or the experience, but they were just naturally a lovely voice to listen to.
Yeah.
And so I think it goes both ways. It's like, yes, are people that have had training and had that experience, are they going to naturally maybe fit into it a little bit easier at first? Yes. But if you have a lovely voice, it's totally teachable. And you can get there if you're willing to learn. So, yeah, initially my assessment was based off of their written profiles mostly. And I definitely struggled with the thought of like, is my voice pleasant to listen to? Is it something that other people will want to listen to? And I didn't know, and that was really scary.
Did you do anything to test that out, like record a little sample and send it to your readers or anything like that?
I didn't. And maybe I should have, but I kind of just the way that I treat a lot of things in my life is I look at it, I get excited about it, and I just kind of jump in and do it. And I figured if I just did one audiobook, then I would get the feedback that I needed and then I could go from there, right? So
Yeah.
maybe it would have been more efficient and smarter to just do a smaller sample, but I just full on did the first book.
So, what is your estimate of how long it took you to record that in comparison to how many hours it ended up being?
Yeah. I think a good rule of thumb for anybody starting out is that it's going to take you well, and I'll caveat this with if you're doing the mastering and editing as well, because some people will record and then pay somebody to do the mastering and editing. I decided to just do it all because I wanted to learn the whole process and figure out how it worked and see if I was even capable of it. And so I think, yeah, good rule of thumb is like 3 hours to every 1 hour of finished audio. So now that I've done, over 40 plus audiobooks, I've gotten that down to maybe like an hour and a half to 2 hours for every 1 hour.
Oh, no
So
kidding.
I make
That's very efficient.
it's great. I make less mistakes. Well, and again, I'm recording my own stuff.
Mhm.
And so I don't have to do any research ahead of time, right? I just know exactly what's going to be happening. And so, but I make less mistakes. I figured out a process that works for me so that I don't make as many mistakes. The editing is super easy. And my mastering, my studio is set up so that I know exactly what levels of audio I'm going to get every single time. And it fits within the requirements. So I really don't have to do any mastering at this point either. So once you figure out your setup, it can be way more efficient. But when you're first starting, yeah, it's like 3 hours to every 1 hour finished.
I would have guessed based on my very brief attempt as I thought about narrating
Yeah.
a nonfiction book, I would have guessed longer. But
Yeah. Well, and for some people, it very well could take longer. I think that's an average with a lot of the people that I've talked to and my friends that are professional audiobook narrators. They're not writers, they just only narrate. That's kind of the consensus.
yeah. Um, I can imagine a lot of people are now saying, "Well, doing my own audio, that sounds great. I'm signing up."
Yeah.
So, what are some things that you would advise should be red flags that maybe people should not be thinking about narrating their own books.
Oh, like reasons why they shouldn't jump in and do it?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's always the time cost, right? And that has to be weighed carefully. I'll tell you why I decided to continue with it, because when I first started doing it, it was so hard. It was taking up so much of my time. All of those thoughts came into my head like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe it would be more efficient and better to just pay somebody who does this professionally. But when I finished that first book, the benefits that came from that were surprising and plentiful. So I assumed that I was just going to be getting better at narrating, but at the end of that book, I became a better writer. And that really surprised me. I think when you go through and you read what you've written and you're like saying it out loud, there's something about that process that helps you see the holes in your characters. It helps you see the ways that you've written sentences terribly or similarly, and you would rather have more variety. I mean, there were just so many things by the end of that book that I felt like I can't afford not to read my books out loud because it teaches me so much as a writer. So I think a reason for not recording your audiobook is if you just simply do not want to spend the time doing it, which is completely understandable. For me, those benefits far outweigh that cost. And I feel like it helps me with all of my other goals as a writer. Another reason would be if you do get feedback that your voice is not pleasant to listen to, then that could be one. Or if you don't enjoy the process, right? So I know some people that have tried it and it just really stressed them out and they had a lot of anxiety about it. And, maybe that's not the right thing for you. But if it's something that fuels your creative process, and like for me, I now consider myself a narrator first. So I think about like I write my books so I can narrate them. And that completely shifted from where I was at before. So, yeah, I think those reasons, but I think there are so many reasons to do it and to at least try it. I feel like even if you tried it and you didn't end up doing it long term, you would gain so much benefit from trying it. So, yeah, I don't think it has to be something you stick with forever, but I think every author would benefit from at least giving it a go.
I do completely agree about the benefits of reading your work out loud. I do that
Yeah.
myself, even though I'm not recording it, but I just
Yeah.
do it as the very, very final review. And I think that's really true. I would
Yeah.
say that for myself, the reasons that I didn't pursue narrating my own books are, first of all, and I hate saying this because people might not notice until I say this, but I have a little bit of a lisp. And
Oh,
so I think it would be distracting for a listener to hear that over an entire book. And
hmm,
also my voice is such that my voice deteriorates very quickly. So
yeah.
during the period I was trying to narrate, in this case, a nonfiction book, I could only narrate a very short amount of time before I could hear that my voice was starting to get raspy.
Yeah.
And you don't want to have this pattern where like a chapter starts out and you sound great, it's sound worse and worse. And then the next chapter starts and you sound great again. That I was just having to section it out into such small bits to let my voice recover that it
Yeah.
was impractical from like a logistical point of view.
Yes. From a physical yeah, from a physical standpoint, I think that's a really good point. Sometimes I forget about that because I've been a singer for so long that my voice has been trained to withstand that, like, those muscles have grown and they're supportive and I have a lot of breath control. And so it is pretty simple for me. I think when I sit in a booth, I mean, I can record sometimes when I've been behind on a deadline, I've recorded for 6 hours straight and it was totally fine, you know? So, I try not to do that because my brain actually gets really tired and I start making more mistakes and then the editing becomes more difficult, but yeah, it's an athletic event. I think of it as an athletic event, like, I get sweaty in there, you get really into it and you're using your abs and your diaphragm to support your voice, and so I think it definitely takes time and energy to work up to being able to do it in longer stretches for sure. And for some people that may not be practical or you might not ever get to the point where you feel like it's a comfortable thing.
Well, what you were saying about it is an athletic event, I have proof of this because back during the pandemic, I was having problems with my mouth and I went to a whole bunch of doctors. I
Yeah.
went to a physical therapist and they said that my mouth muscles were very weak.
Oh,
And
Yeah.
And they speculated it was because now I could go for days and days and days, and the only person I was talking to was my
Mm.
husband, and
Yeah.
that it's, it's an unexercised muscle, and it's just like your arms or your legs. Like if you're not exercising
Yeah.
your speaking apparatus, that it's going to become weak.
Yeah, isn't that so interesting?
Yeah.
We don't really think about all of the muscles in our face or in our neck or our throat or, around our lungs and our stomachs and middles. And I mean, yeah, it's a lot of things going on there working all together at once. So, yeah, I think that's a really good point that you brought up. And by the way, I will just say, I think that your voice is very pleasant to listen to. And I
Thank you.
think what you're describing with a small lisp, I just think it's endearing. So,
Well, thank you.
I wouldn't write it off.
I wish they had a different word for that particular
Uh,
speech condition, because I can sound fine until I say that word, and then it's just
right?
it's like designed to highlight what the very issue it's
It's
describing.
very true. Well, I didn't even notice. I just thought your voice was pleasant. So there
Well,
you
thank
go.
you. Thank you. I think that the other reason that I never really seriously thought about narrating a novel, for some of the reasons we talked about.
Yep.
I can imagine doing a recording of a short story, not that I would
Mhm.
put it up as like a saleable item, but for like social media or promotional purposes or something like that.
Yeah.
I think that the other thing that stood in my way is exactly what you were saying about the performance aspect, and that I actually at one point changed the narrators for my novels because the
Mm.
person I had narrating the early novels was had a beautiful voice, like had all the criteria, but she was doing more of a reading. And then I saw the move going more toward a performance of the work.
Oh, yeah.
And I
That
ended up
happens.
switching to someone who had a little bit more, was dramatizing it a little bit more. And by dramatizing, I don't mean like over dramatizing. I just mean
Sure.
she's acting out the parts.
Yeah.
And that's a very specific talent. And you obviously have it, but not all authors do. It's not
Yeah.
guaranteed that if you're good at writing, you're going to be good at performing as well.
Yeah. Yep, I totally agree. What I have found that is so interesting is that readers really have a preference. So it can be as varied and widely dynamic as preferences for novels themselves. Like we all, as authors, have a totally different writing voice, and some readers will connect to it and some readers won't. Some readers like a wide variety of writing, and some readers really only like this narrow niche. And that's how it is for audiobook narrators too. So I know some narrators that are very performative, think like the Harry Potter books or something like that, where it's just like these wild voices and in fantasy books and stuff like that. And then I know some that are completely straight and they don't do different voices for other characters. They don't do much at all besides read it, and people love it. I mean, I think about the book, was it Will Wheaton that narrated Ready Player One? I think he was the narrator for that, and it's totally straight. Like, he doesn't do performative voices. I loved that audiobook.
Yeah.
So, I really think that it's one of those things that sometimes we judge ourselves about our capabilities and what other people will like, but I found that it's so varied that sometimes, if you don't like doing voices, don't do voices. If you like doing voices, go for it. For me, I prefer a more narrative style where it sounds like you're talking to your best friend. And that's kind of the narration that I prefer. I don't really like it when somebody is overly dramatic or taking too much time on the words and it just feels like it's drawing them out. I don't really enjoy that personally. So I tend to narrate in more a narrative style.
Yeah.
But there are some people that love that.
Well, I'm going to use this as an entree to the thing that we can't get through the conversation without mentioning, and that it's AI.
Yes,
And I
totally.
can see coming down the road.
Mhm.
So my dream scenario is that I would work with my human narrator to license her voice
Yeah.
when a new book came out, because my narrator does other stuff. I think she's still only doing my books as a favor to me. And
That's
so
so funny.
when I have a new book come out, there's usually a long lag between when the book is available in print and ebook and
Totally.
when the audio is available. And I thought my dream would be that she trains an AI in her voice.
Mhm.
When the book is ready, I press narrate and do
Create.
what
Yeah.
create. And then she and I share the royalties, which I think would be, fantastic all around.
Yeah.
And I think that the added benefit there is that the listener could say, I want it more dramatic. I want it less dramatic.
Oh, that
I'm
would be
turning
cool.
it to 11. I'm turning it to 2. I want it in French,
Yeah.
So I think that in my mind, the ideal scenario going forward for narration factoring in AI
Mhm.
is informed by like the cost. We
Yeah,
we started right out with the idea of the
totally.
cost, and also the idea that there are many, many, many books out there that are unavailable to people who are visually impaired because no human narrator is ever going to get around to narrating them.
Yeah.
So, with that little background, is there anything you would like to share in your perspective as a narrator about AI?
When it comes to AI, yeah, I mean, I get this question all the time. I've had people ask, like, "Are you so worried that, you won't be able to narrate?" And I'm like, "Well, first of all, no, because I'm narrating my own stuff mostly." I mean, I do narrate for other authors as well, but I'm always gonna write for myself to narrate. So I'm not worried about that because I actually enjoy the process of narrating, and I enjoy bringing it to life in that way. And again, it's like that learning process that's happening that if I insert AI into that, then I lose the capability of learning through that system. And it's the same with writing. I mean, it's amazing when we have tools that can help us. Also, I'm more interested in the creation, in the actual
Yeah.
process of it. The way I always answer that question is I am thrilled for the accessibility that AI brings. I think you're exactly right that there are so many books that would never be accessible to people that need audio without it. Like, it's just so amazing to have it as an option for that. I don't feel threatened by it at all because I'm still gonna continue to do the things that I love to do regardless. Is it gonna make it more affordable and more efficient for authors that need it? Yeah, and that's an exciting thing too. That's amazing. For me, I think that we will find a lot more value in the creative process that humans bring to the table. When you clone a voice, like, it's amazing, it sounds great, you can listen to it, but there's not gonna be really anything surprising in there,
Mhm.
something new in there, right? Because it's based off of a certain snippet of recorded voice. Every time I record something, there's something that surprises me, or there's a new emotion that I get from that character that I wasn't getting before that suddenly comes out through my voice. And I think that that is the piece that won't be replaceable, and I think we'll be able to find value in both. So, my hope is that AI will bridge the gap between some of these things that weren't a possibility for authors, and that we'll also learn to just really value and celebrate that creative piece that humans bring to the table.
Yeah, I have created AI audio for my nonfiction books because
Yeah,
as a reader slash listener, I'm just looking to absorb content when I'm
totally.
listening to audio of
Yeah.
nonfiction books, and that's fine. And then every time I have a new piece of fiction ready, I go and I put a couple of pages into a couple of AI tools, and I'm like, oh no, no. Not yet. Maybe someday, but not yet.
Maybe
It's just
someday, right?
yeah,
And I'm sure, every single, like, week, it feels like it's getting better. Every
yeah.
single month for sure. And I will not be surprised if it gets to the point where you really can't tell the difference between whether it's been AI narrated or human narrated just for a basic listener, right?
Mhm.
But on the actor side, like, there's just something that can't be replaced by AI with that process. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just like art. AI art exists, but artists still love to create. So, I think it can be both. It doesn't have to be either or.
Well, I really like that idea of the surprise, that I think that the
Yeah.
one thing that you're never gonna get either as an author or as a listener is a sense of surprise, and I know I love listening, proof listening
Yeah.
to my audiobooks when my narrator finishes it, and every once in a while, she'll read something not at all the way I pictured it or heard it in my
Yes.
head, and it tickles me,
Yes.
like, my husband will
It's
hear
so
me, like,
great.
kind of laughing or giggling, and he'll say, "Oh, what's up?" And I said, "Oh, you've gotta listen to this, it's so great."
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's
Yeah,
like something that just is organic about that process of performing and bringing something to life. So yeah, I don't think, at least for me, that there needs to be any threat, but I am really interested to see how it progresses and how people use it.
yeah. So, let's assume people have heard this, they've weighed the pros and cons, they've decided audio sounds great, but they don't wanna do it
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah.
So or maybe they do wanna do it themselves, but I wanted to back up a little bit and talk about earlier in the process, like when you're just working on the manuscript,
Yeah.
are there things that you recommend authors do to prepare the manuscript for eventual reading, whether they're doing it themselves or plan to hire someone else.
Yeah, 100%. I think I told you because of Michael Laron, our mutual friend, he suggested, he was like, oh, you have all this knowledge, like you should put it into a course. And so I did. I put together a course for authors to help them with each of these things, each of these steps in the process, to be able to prepare their manuscript, get the equipment that they need, get everything ready to go. And I talk about that more in depth there. I think you also mentioned kind of the equipment piece as well. I think, again, this can vary widely by preference, but overwhelmingly, when you are listening to something that has been narrated, it is a bit abrasive to listen to endless speech tags. So that is something that is quickly going away, almost 100% away, are those speech tags of like she said or he asked or, any of those types of things. In my books, I sometimes use them when I have to, if it's a group scene with like 15 different people talking or something like that, and I really need to have some speech tags. Otherwise, I use exclusively action tags because it's just easier to listen to. So when you're creating a book for audio, that's one of the things to go for sure, I think. And you also have to be careful about your descriptions because when people are reading on a page, their eyes kind of skip ahead and you can see things ahead and before the sentence that you're reading. And so things can make sense in context a little bit more. When you're listening, all you have is the sentence that's in your ear. And so I've actually switched up the way that I write my descriptions as well. I tend to write a description before as opposed to after, just so people get the image in their head when they're listening instead of having to like do the mental scramble of seeing this person one way and then having to revert and see them differently if I describe it a paragraph later, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Well, the
So
thing that popped into my head when you said this is something I find I'm doing. I hadn't been thinking of it as for audio, but I think it helps audio, is that I've gotten very aware of things like she jumped when the doorbell rang.
yeah,
And instead saying the doorbell rang and she jumped,
yes.
because you kind of want things in the order they happen. Although exactly as you're saying, I hadn't thought of it this way, but I think in writing, she jumped when the doorbell rang works because you've kind of like
Yeah,
noticed
you
that
see
there's
it.
doorbell is going to be coming up in a word or two.
Yeah.
But if you're listening to it, you do get the she jumped, and then there's that millisecond where the listener's going,
Like what?
yeah,
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. That's a
yeah,
great example. So yeah, just things like that you start to think about when you're listening or narrating it. Because sometimes I would narrate the stuff that I wrote and I'm like, that makes no sense. And then, oh yeah, now it makes sense. But I'm like, well, that's not going to make sense to the listener. So I
yeah.
need to go back and do that. I also change the way, like if I'm doing letters or text messages or things like that, the way that I tag it in my book is going to be so it makes sense for audio. So they won't be able to see that one text message is blue and one text message is gray. And so it needs to have the name above it, right? At least initially, there needs to be that distinction so that they know who is texting each other or yeah, just all of that stuff that you think about that you're not going to be able to see and know from the page.
So when you are working toward an eventual audiobook, do you end up having two versions? You have the ebook and print version that says he said she said, or has the blue and green text messages or
Right.
something like that, and then you have a slightly different version for the audio, or are you actually
All the
changing your
same.
writing all the same?
Yep,
That's
I
very
changed my
interesting.
writing. So my books now, they don't have the speech tags in them. Very, very rarely. I think the last 6 to 8 books I've done don't have speech tags. They just have action tags. So instead of saying he said, it would be, he picked up his glass and took a drink, dialogue.
Yeah,
And then the next one would be, dialogue. And then, she smoothed a piece of hair behind her ear or something like that. It's just like something,
yeah.
something to that who spoke, but it's not just the she said, he said, she asked, whatever. Yeah.
I think that the opposite of what you were saying about your eye kind of reads a little bit ahead and can accommodate things like she jumped when the doorbell rang,
Yeah.
is that it skips over things like he said, she said. And I
Yes.
remember listening to an audiobook where there was this long string of text and every line ended with he said or she said.
Uh-huh.
And it was probably multiple characters. And I'm guessing that's why they had so many tags. Like there were three or
Right.
four people talking. And so the author, I can understand that illustrating who it is each time with an action would get
Uh,
weird. But if you're just reading it on the page, your eye skips past that.
Yep.
But if you're listening to it, it was brutal. It was like, my least favorite 45 seconds of audiobook listening 'cause it was
Yeah.
just it sounded so awkward.
The worst. Yes, it's so annoying. And yeah, I think that writing is trending that way in general just because of audio. I think audio has changed it. So yeah, I think you obviously still have to be careful to make sure that you're being clear.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it just really took out all of those fluffy things that didn't need to be in there. It just made things more streamlined. So I feel like that's a good thing in writing when you can be, less words to say the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to still put a certain number of dialogue tags in my writing, but when I give the manuscript to my narrator, I say, feel free to leave them out. And one of the things she's very good at is distinguishing different voices. And so
Yes.
even if it's a long string, like occasionally she'll leave one in so people can kind of just orient themselves and make sure
Yes.
they understand where they are. But in general, it's very easy to follow the conversation, especially if it's only two people
Yeah.
without that. And she's good at picking which ones she should just not bother saying.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, why do you keep them in your actual manuscript then? Because if it's between two people, the reader can distinguish too, right?
Well, what I find is that as a reader, if I'm in that sort of, just two people going back and forth,
Uh-huh.
at some point, if it's a long string of dialogue, I lose track.
Totally.
And then
Yes.
I have to go back and I have to go like person A, person B, person.
Oh,
Oh,
for
yeah, this
sure.
was person A. And
Yes.
so inserting them periodically to me is
Oh, yeah.
helpful as someone who's reading visually.
Yeah. No, I think that's totally true. Because again, it's like you have to prioritize clarity over everything else,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So, yeah, putting them in every once in a while for sure. But I definitely wonder, I'm like, if when I see manuscripts that have a lot of them, I'm like, I think readers don't need that much,
Yeah.
right? They need something to orient themselves, like you said, but they don't need that much. They're pretty good at figuring out who's talking. So,
Well, I
yeah.
like to me, a nice balance is if you have two people talking, you have a couple of lines of dialogue, and then you have that action that
Yes.
reorients people to what's
Yes.
going on. And then if they have to review a little bit, they don't have to go back to the whole beginning of the
That's
they're
exactly
like,
right.
"Oh, so and so walked through the door, so now I'm
Now I
reoriented.
get it.
Now I've been reminded of who's talking when."
That's exactly right, and I feel like an action tag does so much more descriptive work than a he said or she said.
Yeah.
So for me, I prefer it even if I wasn't doing it for audio now because I would much rather see the little tick in their movement
Yeah.
than just knowing that they said something because I already know that they said something, right?
Yep.
So I love that too. Yeah.
Are there things that an author can do to find what might trip up a narrator? So a very obvious example is if you put a tongue twister in there,
Mhm.
maybe the professional will be able to handle it better than you can. But if you're saying it out loud, then you kind of see where the tongue twisters are. But are there other things like that? Maybe it's not the actual verbalization of the word, but just
Right.
things that are going to be more difficult for an audiobook narrator to handle.
Handle. Well, I think the obvious one is different accents. When you're putting in characters that have really obscure or just a ton of different accents in the same book, that can be really tricky. Honestly, I think the best way to catch those things is by reading your own work out loud and seeing those. There are definitely sentences that I do not use in my books because I know that when I go to read it, I'm going to hate myself for writing that in my book. Like anything with grasped, like that's a weird one when it's combined with a lot of different words. Or I know the narrator, I'm like blanking on his name right now, but the narrator for the Harry Potter books, he talked about pocketed. He hated the word pocketed. I think for every narrator, it's probably going to be something different. Grasped is really hard. It's hard to make the d sound right in a row, and it always slows me down. So I tend to stay away from some things like that that I just know are personally hard for me. But accents for sure can make things slower. I love putting accents in because it challenges me personally. And so I like to do that, but making sure that, if you've got a scene, I kind of curse the authors that put a scene in where I had to do a book like this one time where it was like an Irish an Irish man with a posh British woman next to a Kiwi trainer with like, what I mean, just like so many accents in one scene. And it takes a little bit longer to be able to narrate that effectively. But honestly, my greatest wish for people that are hiring a narrator is to find a narrator that gives you feedback. Because again, all these things that we talked about with like the learning that happens when you read somebody's work, the authors that I've worked with, I have like 1,000 things that I would love to be like, you could do this, or you could do that, or this person, if they're in this accent, they really shouldn't be saying these words, for example, because people in this country don't use those words, or speech tags, descriptions. Oh, you use this word 1,000 times in your manuscript. Maybe you should use this other word instead. I mean, there's all of that you find when you're reading the book, but I found that there are a lot of authors that don't want that feedback, right? They're nervous about their stuff to begin with, and so if it would feel critical if somebody said something like that to them. And so I often do not offer it unless they ask for it. So I would recommend, if you're hiring a narrator, to straight up say, if you find things in my book that are off-putting or strange or that don't make sense or whatever, I would love to hear it. I would love to hear it. If you see ways that my writing could be better, I would love to hear that, because narrators, I have talked to so many of them that are like, oh yeah, and they could do this better, or they could do that. And it's like the best feedback you could ever get.
Yeah.
Because somebody's reading it out loud. So if you can, put aside your pride for a moment and take that critical feedback, I think that could be one of the most valuable things.
The thing that popped into my head right in the middle of narrating one of my audiobooks, I got this email from my narrator that had like one sentence that was said, "She says evidently a lot." Yeah. She's like, "You're right. I did publish this 6 months ago, but I can go
Yeah.
in and take out some of the evidentlys or change
But
them to
that's so
apparentlys
great.
or whatever." Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
there are like a couple of considerations. One is, when is the audiobook coming out? Like, if it's all coming out, if they're narrating it like as you're preparing to launch, then that's
Yeah.
great. Especially if you're indie published, you can make those changes.
Exactly.
If they're narrating months later, then it's super easy to make that kind of change.
Mhm.
But even if it's something more substantive that maybe you're just not in a position to change, but
For
it's still
sure.
good to hear,
Yep.
even if you don't promise to act on it based on what
Oh,
they tell
yeah.
you.
No, absolutely. And oftentimes that is what it is, because, if a narrator can give you that instant feedback and you can make those adjustments and continue on with your manuscript, fantastic. That's like best case. But times it would be something that came after the fact that would just inform your writing for the next book,
Mhm.
right? Not something that you would need to go back and change. I spent a lot of time thinking through that when I was narrating my books, because I would often narrate them and be like, oh, well, now I want to go back and change this whole character, or I want to change this whole thing because I didn't do a good enough job with this or this or this. But the reality is, like, you could spend years doing that on a manuscript and still never get it to perfection, because it never gets to perfection. And so I kind of made the decision that I was not going to go backward. I was going to take what I learned from this book. And obviously, if I noticed a crazy discrepancy or something like that, I would change it. But I didn't really worry about anything else. I was going to do it, and then I was going to take notes of what I would change for next time and then use it in my next book. So, but that does take, you have to stomach that a little bit if you suddenly see all the mistakes in your manuscript and are not going to go back and fix it. That can
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, but it's true, like, regardless of where that input's coming from, whether it's coming from your narrator, whether it's coming from beta readers, or
Yeah.
reviews you read on the retail platforms, or whatever it might
Exactly.
be.
Exactly. Yep. And I feel like that's just one more piece. Like, your narrator is going to know your work sometimes better than you do, because they're reading it out loud and they're coming at it from a totally fresh set of eyes too. And learning those characters. Like, one of the best compliments that I can give to an author is that their characters made sense to me from the get-go, because they didn't even have to give me very much information, because their writing was so good that I knew who that character was. And I just narrated a book like that. It was for Cat Farrow. It was like a young adult book that I just narrated. And we hardly had to talk at all about her characters, because they were just so well fleshed out that I just knew exactly who they were supposed to be. So yeah, just great feedback for future writing.
Yeah. One thing I found was useful is to give the narrator a character that they
Yes.
can model the voice on. So, like, if you have I had a big beefy character, and her first take of the character's voice didn't suggest big and beefy, and so I found a video of Dick Butkus.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
he was the host of Saturday Night Live, and he was doing the monologue, and I sent her a recording. This was long. I had to go back
Oh, yeah.
way
That's
into
a
the archives for that one, but send her that, and then that was
Mm.
exactly what she needed. And
Yep.
the other thing that I've found is that I work in Scrivener. I write in Scrivener, and
Mm.
Scrivener has a setting where you can, when you export it to Word or whatever, you can
Yeah.
either include or exclude struck through text. And
Yes.
I was always trying to be very diligent with with making notes about, like, maybe I forget to mention that the person has a Southern accent until page 30,
Totally.
and now they've recorded, 29 pages of the person without a Southern accent. And I tried to be very diligent about keeping a separate list for the narrator of those kinds of things. And it was
Mhm.
just very difficult to kind of have it separate. And so what I started doing is I would put the narrator's initials and like brackets next to those kinds of things that she needed to
Yeah.
know. And then I would strike it out so that I could either export it with or without her initials right in
Oh,
the middle
that's
of the
so
text.
perfect.
And
Yeah.
so at the end, I could just send it to her, and could say, like, look for your initials in brackets. And then she could just go through and say, oh, she has a Southern accent.
Good
She
notes.
has a cold. She's raspy. Now her nose is broken. So she sounds nasal, whatever that might be.
Yeah. No, I
Um,
think that's fantastic. I actually, when I narrate for other authors, I send them an onboarding form that asks for that information. So it's like, list your characters. Like, how do you see these characters? If you have any information or ideas about these characters that you really would like to see, put it in here, right?
yeah.
So that same thing, when I see those characters, and I also have like I have them list like the first place where those characters appear so that I can be ready for it. And when I look through those chapters, I can be thinking about all those things that they gave. So I love doing the onboarding form because it helps me. Having it right in the text would be amazing. So I think that's a really good idea.
Cool. Any other tips you'd like to share in terms of best practices that you would want authors to know as they're thinking about working with another person to narrate their works?
I guess I would say just be really communicative with your narrator. So if you've never done audio before, ask all the questions. And that's sometimes a hard thing because when you haven't done it before, you might not know all of the questions to ask, right?
Yeah.
But I think as narrators, we're always learning what questions to answer for you before. Like every time I work with somebody new, I realize, oh, I should have been more clear on this part of the process, or I should detail this more. So we're kind of working on it on our side. But then on your side, if anything doesn't make sense to you, or if you're feeling nervous about any part of the process, just talk about it. Speak up and let us know because oftentimes like I tend to prefer like a more creative hands-off approach. Some narrators really like to be like talking to their author every step of the way. I like to get those initial things and then provide some sample chapters and take some feedback and then kind of run with it, right? And so every narrator is going to be totally different. And you need to make sure that you two are on the same page with what you're expecting with the production process to be. So if you're expecting them to send you every chapter for you to listen to and approve before the whole book gets made, then you need to detail that with your narrator because some might do that and some might not because that takes a lot more time, right?
Yeah.
And for me, when I have a window to record an audiobook, I don't have the time to go back and forth and wait for somebody to email me back before I'm producing another chapter. And so, yeah, and then also timeline. Really talk about the timeline and figure out like what it's going to look like, when they're going to produce it, when it's going to be available. I prefer to produce really quickly. So when you're talking about this huge gap between the release of the book and then the audio coming out, I don't do that. I like to release it. If I sign on to do an audiobook with an author, then I like it to be produced about 2 weeks later. Right. And so I keep my schedule that way. But there are some authors that it'll be a year and a half later.
Yeah.
So talk to them about that. There's just so much differentiation between narrators and the process can look so different depending on who you work with. So finding the right voice is super important, but also finding somebody who communicates the way that you want, who produces the way that you want. Yeah, I think that can be just as important because it can be a really frustrating process if you're not on the same page.
Well, I think that authors and the narrators they work with will face a less frustrating circumstance because of the lovely tips that you have shared. So,
Yeah,
Cindy, thank you so much for giving us this kind of behind the scenes, behind the sound booth curtain of audiobook narration. And please let
for
everyone
sure.
know where they can go to find out more about you and everything you do online.
Yeah. So I mentioned the course that I offer. If you're interested in doing self narration or you even just want to see information on how the process works, I have information there on uploading to all the different places like ACX. I even do YouTube. So I talk about producing audio for YouTube as well. In that course, we go from the very beginning of like I want to do this. Where do I start? All the way until being able to publish your audiobook. You can find that on my website, cindygunderson.com, under the narration tab. So if you click there, you can see all the information on the course. And then my books, my audiobooks and paperbacks are all available there as well. Currently, my ebooks are all in Kindle Unlimited. So they're all available on Amazon right now. But my audio you can listen to for free on YouTube. So I have it all there. I have it in discounted bundles on my website. It's also available on Spotify and ACX and all the places. So that's where you can find me. And I'm always happy to answer questions or talk audiobooks or authoring or narration or anything. You can just email me at cyndyauthor@gmail.com.
Great. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me, Matty. This was lovely.